Welcome back to Firestorm Games and another painting tutorial. With the new releases of the contrast paints, we thought we would revisit some of our previous how to quickly paint tutorials. You may remember our previous videos on Plaguemarines and Ultramarines from the release of 8th edition, and in this video we'll be comparing both the process and the end results of using contrast against these original tutorials. So let's begin with our Plaguemarine. The first step was to prime it with one of the new spray primers, Wraithbone in this case. This creates a nice smooth surface, perfect for contrast paints. I chose Wraithbone for this model as it will feature several warm colours which the slightly off-white of Wraithbone will definitely benefit. The first step after priming was to apply a layer of Plaguebearer Flesh straight from the pot to the armour of our Plaguemarine. This will give us a really quick, sickly green colour. The contrast paint pulls from the edges, creating a slight edge highlight, whilst also pulling slightly in the recesses to create some shading. You can see here just how easily the paint is applied, but it's still worth being neat. Areas that will be later covered with other contrast paints should be kept as untouched as possible, otherwise you may find that these accidents show through your later paint layers. This particular Plaguemarine features several protruding tentacles, and for these areas of exposed flesh, I've opted to use some Magos Purple. This particular purple is a little less intense than the other pinks and purples, so it's great for creating the appearance of corrupted flesh. For the bony protrusions and the cloth areas, I'm making use of some Skeleton Horde. It's great for creating bone colour whilst also giving the cloth a dirted appearance. To enhance the decayed nature of the Plaguemarine's armour, we can create some quick rust effects using some Gryph Hound orange applied directly to any metal areas of the model. This orange is very highly pigmented and results in a very intense and stylised appearance of rust, which works well for Plaguemarines. Next, we have the areas between the armour panels and the weapon stock itself to tackle. These can be covered with some black Templar for a result similar to a simple black base coat followed by a subtle grey highlight. For some of the small areas of dripping ichor, I've opted to use the bright green of Warp Lightning. For these organic areas, contrast paints work really well, as they flow across the smooth curves and pool where the shadows would normally form. So at this stage, the Plaguebearer is completed with just 6 contrast paints over a primer, and in around 20 minutes. As you can see, the paints go on really easily and require just a single coat, which helps to speed things up greatly. However, I feel that the model is looking a little bright for my personal taste, so let's give the whole model a wash of Agrax Earthshade. This should dull down the colours and really boost the recess shading that the contrast paints have already begun. Once the wash is dried, you can see that the result is a much more subdued and grim dark looking miniature than what we had before, and thanks to the speedy nature of washes, it didn't increase the overall painting time by much at all. So with the Plaguemarine completed, let's move on to the Primerous Marine. Unlike the previous model, this time we're using some Grey Seer spray primer to start our miniature. The cooler nature of this primer will help with the blues, black and greys that we'll be applying later on. So for our Ultramarine, we'll be using the aptly named Ultramarine Blue and applying it over the entirety of the armour in the same manner that we applied the earlier Plaguebearer Flesh. Next, I wanted to use the Black Templar in much the same way as before, by focusing it into the recessed areas and over the bolter's stock. For the metal areas, rather than using a metallic paint like Leadbelcher, let's try some basic non-metallic metal effects and paint some Basilicanum Grey over them. The shading and highlighting of the grey contrast paint will create the fairly simple appearance of a dulled steel. Continuing our attempts with some simple non-metallic metal effects, let's hit the shoulder trim and the chest motif with some Nazdreg yellow to create the appearance of gold. For the belt and the leather pouches around the waist, I'm going to be using a base coat of Snakebite Leather. With the bulk of the model completed, the only thing left to do is to finish off the Purity Seal by hitting the parchment with some Skeleton Horde before using some Blood Angels Red over the wax seal. This super intense red can also be used on the lenses in the Space Marine's helmet as well as the Auspex screen as well. And here we have the completed model. The blue is a little darker than I would have liked and would probably be better suited to a Crimson Fist, but I was able to very quickly and easily apply it. It took a little longer to paint this model, coming in at close to 40 minutes. This was most likely due to the neater application that the more prim and proper Space Marines required. The dirty, ununiform nature of Plaguemarines are much more forgiving in contrast paints. So now that we've completed these models, let's compare them to our previous attempts. So first we have our Plaguemarine. Our original attempt took longer to paint than our contrast model due to the need for applying good solid base coats. This would have taken even longer if I hadn't used the Death Guard green coloured primer to start things off. The results are by and large the same though. The original Plaguemarine does feature metallics and is a lot more darker and duller, but they're both easily recognisable as Plaguemarines. So both techniques are perfectly valid, but if you're looking to shave off some painting time, contrast paints are definitely the way to go here. For the primerist, results are a little more different than with the Plaguemarines. The original tutorial made use of a Macragge Blue primer, a dry brush, and then some base coats followed by a wash. This created a different effect than what our contrast attempt did. The old method looked a little dusty, but this was probably due to the dry brushing method. If I had gone a little bit lighter, I could have focused it more on the hard edges. The contrast painted model, on the other hand, does have a slightly smoother armour finish, but there are still those tide marks that have been left behind by the contrast paints. Now for painting primerist models, I think that painting a combination of regular techniques and contrast paints would probably work best. You could start off with a base coat of Macragge Blue, then you could use some grey sear to pick out some of the areas that you then wanted to hit with contrast paints. This will give you the best of both worlds and it'll give you a slightly quicker painting time. So on the surface, contrast paints are a great tool for anyone looking to quickly and easily paint their models. In our previous tutorials, we've made extensive use of washes and dry brushing to quickly create edge, highlight and recess detailing, but contrast paints seem to be able to do both really easily and really quickly. They can completely replace your existing simple painting techniques or slot right into them by making the often laborious task of base coating much quicker. However, they aren't the magic wonder product, and they do have some flaws. The application of the larger smooth panels on the primerist armour did leave a less uneven coverage than regular base coating would have done. While this isn't too much of a problem for dirty or more organic looking models like the Plaguemarine, it does limit their effectiveness for achieving cleaner looking paint jobs and use on larger models. So expect to see contrast paints making more appearances in our future how to quickly paint videos, sitting nicely alongside our more traditional methods, helping us to create decent looking tabletop quality paint jobs in no time at all. If you're looking to pick up some contrast paints for yourself or any other Games Workshop product for that matter, be sure to check out the Firestorm Games web store for up to 10% off the RRP and even more on pre-orders. You can find a link to the web store below. Let us know in the comments below what you thought about contrast paints and if you would like to see us use them in future tutorials. Make sure you subscribe to be kept up to date with all of our latest videos as well. And so we just finish off by saying a big thank you for watching this video, and we hope to see you again on Firestorm Games.